President Biden kicking off his term by releasing the US intelligence report into the killing of the US journalist and resident Jamal Khashoggi. The president has refrained from directly punishing the Crown Prince over Khashoggi's murder, yet sanctions have been placed on a number of Saudi officials, and the administration has said US-Saudi relations need recalibrating, and I quote him on that. What evidence to date of that recalibration, and how would you describe current relations with the US, sir?
I would describe our relations as robust. They reflect a historically strong relationship that has crossed many administrations, both Republican and Democrat, going back now well over 75 years. And we have a strong joint agenda with many issues of cooperation that we continue to work on, regional security in the forefront of those. And we have a robust dialogue going on between the Kingdom and the Biden administration, including frequent contacts with our colleagues in the US. And what we're hearing is that there is a lot of areas of agreement. For instance, one of the areas we're working very closely on is Yemen and bringing an end to the conflict there, and where we have announced the Saudi initiative for a ceasefire, which is something that we've coordinated very closely with the Biden administration as well as Martin Griffith. And, we continue to work very closely on many other files. So there is a continuing robust, strong dialogue between the two countries.
Relief that the Biden administration didn't go any further at this point in, quote, recalibrating the relationship, and any further sanctions, for example, against the Crown Prince himself?
I think the Biden administration sees that the relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is absolutely key to the U.S. interests and to U.S. Priorities in the region and beyond. And they understand that working with the Kingdom requires working with us and with our leadership. And we will continue to dialogue on how to best deliver for both of our countries, and to make sure that both of our interests are served and that we deliver the benefits that we have over the decades.
Let's talk about the importance of this relationship at this point. As you have rightly pointed out, the US is heavily engaged in trying to find a solution to the conflict in Yemen. They've made Yemen an absolute priority, and to that end, they've worked with you in the Kingdom to present a ceasefire offer to the Houthi rebels, which you yourself have said could pave the way for a, quote, political solution to the conflict there. Have the Houthis shown any signals that they are willing to engage with the Kingdom?
So far, we have seen continuing attacks across our borders, including attacks against civilian targets and infrastructure, and we see them continuing to attack Marib. So the indications are that they are still not serious about taking the steps that are necessary to move this conflict into a political phase. Nonetheless, we continue to push forward. We continue to push our proposal forward, and we are engaged. We have worked closely, as I said, with both Martin Griffith and Tim Lindeking, and we are in contact with the Houthis to try and convince them that putting the best interests of Yemen first is critical and key, and that we should all work together to make sure that this conflict moves now to a political process.
You have highlighted that attacks by the Houthis continue on the Kingdom and its infrastructure. Will you take this proposed ceasefire off the table if those attacks continue?
No, we are committed to the ceasefire. The ceasefire, of course, requires that all parties cease fire. And once the Houthis agree to that, we are going to be committed to continuing to push the process of a political solution. We are not going to take the ceasefire off the table, but we will be defending ourselves. We will make sure that our people and our infrastructure is protected, and we will also support the government of Yemen.
Were the Houthis emboldened by the Biden administration's decision to reverse Donald Trump's decision to designate them as a group? Was that a mistake on the part of the new US administration?
We certainly feel that the Houthis deserve to be designated as a terrorist organization. They have attacked civilian targets, they have kidnapped people, and they have used terror to impose their will on the people of Yemen. And we think that that designation was correct. Now, we understand the Biden administration logic at removing it. However, of course, we have seen an uptick in attacks since that designation was reversed. Whether those two things are linked, that would be speculation, but that's certainly something that can be guessed at.
Well, the Houthis, of course, insist that any deal should include an agreement from the kingdom to lift the sea and air blockade on what is this strategic Hadida port. The UN and World Food Programme support ending the blockade. A recent CNN investigation uncovering that Saudi warships had prevented oil tankers from docking at the port. As we understand it, 4 fuel ships will now be allowed to dock in Hadida, the first of which arrived last week. Can you provide more detail on that? And is this a temporary arrangement, or is the kingdom officially lifting that air and sea blockade?
So the humanitarian situation in Yemen is, of course, a key consideration for all of us, including the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We are the top aid donor to Yemen. We have committed to giving $420 million this year as well to Yemen. There is no blockade. In the last 90 days, 67 ships docked in Hadida. And there is a continuing flow of goods and services both through Hadida and through 4 border crossings, and as well there are 2 other ports that are active. The situation with fuel ships is related to an agreement that the Houthis have with the government of Yemen related to how the tax revenue from those ships is used. Unfortunately, the Houthis continue to not stick to that agreement, and they have used those funds to subsidize their military efforts, including their ongoing attack on Ma'rib, a city with over 2 million internally displaced people. Now, the government of Yemen has agreed to allow these 4 ships to enter, and we support that. We think that's a good thing, and it's critical that we find a modus operandi between the Houthis and the government of Yemen that ensures that these fuel ships continue to enter, and that the revenues from those fuel ships are used as agreed by the Houthis in the Stockholm Agreement to fund civil services and other issues that are necessary for the people of Yemen, rather than diverting those funds to their war effort. So we will continue to work to make sure that that flow of fuel continues, but beyond fuel ships, ships in general have access to Hadida, and as I said, 67 ships in the 90 days past, and that will continue.
So the blockade on these fuel ships being lifted is not a temporary arrangement, as I understand it from you. This is now the lifting of that blockade. These fuel ships will be allowed to continue to dock. Is that correct?
There is no blockade. There is a mechanism with the United Nations, agreed with the United Nations, to allow ships to enter Hadida, and that mechanism is continuing to be applied. As I said, on fuel ships, there was an issue between the government of Yemen and the Houthis, where the Houthis were not adhering to their commitments, and that resulted in a delay in entering of ships. As long as the Houthis continue to abide by their part of the agreement and they use those funds as agreed in the Stockholm Agreement, there should not be a problem, and we assume the government of Yemen will continue to give their approval for these fuel ships to continue to enter.
I want to talk Israel. 2 days before Israel's election, Benjamin Netanyahu signaled that the normalization of ties with Saudi Arabia could be imminent, saying on national radio, "We will have direct flights for Muslim Israeli pilgrims from Tel Aviv to Mecca." Publicly, the kingdom hasn't changed its position and says the normalization of ties will only come once there's a peace agreement with the Palestinians. The kingdom, though, has opened its airspace to Israel since September last year. And, of course, the 2 countries share a common enemy in Iran. How do you see the kingdom's relationship with Israel evolving, short and long term, sir? Is there a deal? Is there a normalization deal imminent?
I don't know if it's imminent. It's very much dependent on progress with the peace process. So there is, of course, a normalization deal on the table. It has been on the table since 2002. It's called the Arab Peace Plan. And even before that, we had the Fez Initiative, which was presented by the Kingdom in 1982, which puts forward the prospect of full and complete normalization with Israel in return for a just settlement to the Palestinian issue. I think normalizing Israel's status within the region would bring tremendous benefit to the region as a whole. It would be extremely helpful, both economically but also socially and from a security perspective. Now, that normalization in the region can only be successful if we address the issue of the Palestinians, and if we are able to deliver a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders that gives the Palestinians dignity and gives them their rights. If we can find a path towards that, then I think we can see a much safer region, a much more prosperous region, one where everybody can contribute to its success, including Israel.
And you welcome the idea of direct flights for Muslim Israeli pilgrims from Tel Aviv to Mecca. You've not just welcomed that, you have agreed to that, have you, as a country?
We haven't agreed to it, but as I said, if we have progress on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, then we would welcome, hopefully, Israeli citizens of all faiths in the kingdom, not just Muslims. But let's move forward with the peace process first.
What would it take to actually get these flights agreed to? Is it a full peace plan at this point? Because I'm thinking that the window here is very, very short. So is there a sort of watered down proposal that the kingdom might accept at this point in order to get these sort of issues moving?
I mean, right now we're talking about the hypothetical, so there's nothing really I can add to it.